Okay,
Mr. Merle.
the guy who's a different one.
No, that's the super.
So he was the one who did the.
Correct.
Okay.
Totally.
Yeah. He plays like a different, I don't know how to say it.
No, I'm actually really interested, and this may be difficult for you, but how did he make you feel? And I promise you, the reason why I'm asking, I'm gonna get to something, but I am interested.
I mean, I think watching the one scene where he's taking Dolly and CC, and then he's like, oh, like talking to the people walking up the street, like, oh, like, sorry, we'll be with you soon. It's just very deceitful. It's like very, very deceitful, which I guess is probably. Yeah, no, just uncomfortable because they were thinking down against.
So it made you feel uncomfortable?
Yeah.
Anything else? And then, again, this is more of a clinical process, it's not gonna come up on your self-exam. Be very careful of providing reasons as to why someone makes you feel the way they do. Stay in the countertransference, self-examine, let it come. And now for residents with a future in psychiatry, trainees in psychiatry, that is their training, especially during their third year, right? But even as soon as the first week of their PGY1, only after you self-examine your countertransference should you begin to consider why the individual is making you feel the way they do. Don't jump to conclusions. Be in that space, as uncomfortable as it is. Because what I think is a very unique situation provided in this film is that on the surface, this character provides a sense of reality. So it's easy to connect with him in as much as you're a third person viewer. The identification defense mechanism is fairly simplistic here. He represents reality, right? He is what will bound this mother and maybe even the child see what is really going on, what can't possibly be explained by physics or science. Yet, even though he provides, and that's the symbolism of this particular character, at a bit deeper level, it's very difficult to identify. Right? So you might actually do so initially, but soon thereafter, there could be significant feelings of discomfort and anxiety that he evokes in you because of you identifying with him, even though it's a subconscious process. So it is a very interesting character because of that. He both invites us in, and then he pushes us away in terms of identification. Any other thoughts about Mr. Murray? I saw the Asian version of this movie years ago. Is there a counterpart to him in the original film?
There is like the man who also like leads him on a tour and does a similar thing, like, oh, we'll get back to you. It's like really popular this apartment. And one thing that he does is that when they're touring, you can actually see the leak forming in the apartment. If he notices it and doesn't say anything, and then directs her to the kitchen, which is also a mess, something else that I try to like play on. So he comes off as more like this trying to sell something and not really like empathetic to the family. I don't think we see him again, right? I think when they have the issues that go
Only-
downstairs.
Yeah, and then I think this is when the lawyer comes back.
Oh, yeah.
Then he comes back into the picture and they're like, oh, this is the supervisor downstairs problem. I don't know why he didn't fix it. And then the lawyer's like, oh, she called you.
Yeah.
Why didn't you do anything still? He was like, yeah.
And I think there was like maybe some gender stuff going on too, because it was like, if it's male and it's female, a daughter by himself. And so I think that's also kind of like, I know more. There's a great kindergarten down the street and she can do this. And like, she kind of goes with that role, even though it ends up causing it.
And that's in the American version too. Any reason to believe what the individual is hiding has even more to do than just the leak itself? But or the mold itself, even the mold itself. I mean, you know, we wouldn't think about this in terms of, again, looking at either of these films as a psychiatrist or even a non-psychiatrist. But superficially, he's a landlord and he wants to sell this unit. He wants to rent out this unit. If this woman knows that it's haunted, you're probably not going to be able to sell it or even rent it out. So we think it's the mold, but is there any indication that even with the supernatural twist of each of these films, the landlord even knows more than just that? Thoughts?
It's a call. I think Delia also talked about the wind coming from the tent, like tent happening, he like really perks up. And so maybe.
Because it would be interesting if that were true, because all of a sudden our initial thought that, well, he symbolizes reality. And this woman's connection to reality, and that's a very unique role, and one that's quite common motif in horror films. Maybe not.
Yeah, one thing in the Japanese film is that she goes back 10 years later and the building is abandoned, basically. And so it does make you think like maybe there were financial concerns that you were more focused on.
And also like, I think in the Japanese version, they had the name of the missing girl, like on the doorway of the apartment above.
Yeah, so that's all the apartments, the resident's name.
Yeah, and then, but also that apartment was abandoned as well. There was no one living there, and then obviously you go upstairs. and see that it's like- So there's something, like, it's obviously an abandoned room of a missing child. So I feel like he does kind of know something stuff, considering those two are.
And again, all that would challenge our initial impression of him. Whether we disliked him and found him uncomfortable, anxiety provoking or not.
Mm.
All right, the other thing I wanted to make sure that I mentioned, and again, more of a clinical call, would be that not all deceitfulness is antisocial personality.
Mm.
Right, this can be considered to be quote unquote normal or normative behavior, and defy diagnosis. Right, so of course, if it presents on a psych shelf and there's additional signs and symptoms, that deceitfulness certainly would, I think, focus us to a cluster B personality, without antisocial personality disorder. There is no such thing, but we can look at the prequel, Speaking Dark Water, see if in fact that this character hopefully would be cast and hopefully would be cast as a non-adult and had evidence of conduct prior to the age of 50. To really bring home the teaching. If not, then choice A, nothing further to do, no mental illness. This is normative behavior. Any other observations for Mr. Merrick? All right, next character.
It's a lot. I feel like with the divorce going on, she's definitely having a lot of paranoia, especially surrounding like her child being taken away from her. And then after seeing the child missing poster, she's even more paranoid that it's gonna get missing. And then
Do we know who's missing?
yeah. But also from the same kindergarten that the daughter. Yeah. And then.
She was in therapy prior. And it's
Okay.
like kind of vague about why, but she said that she was impacted by like the content of the novel she was proofreading. And she needed like therapy for that.
Do we see any interactions with her and her estranged partner? And which version are we talking about?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But there, it was interesting because the first thing she says to him is like, he told him about like my psychiatric history.
Yeah.
And he was kind of like dismissing what it is. Kind of knew it was like, what make a difference. It's not a difference.
And then when the husband picks up the daughter on her first day of work, he ends up twisting the whole story. And, oh yeah, he just looked over his shoulder. And, wandering in the dark,
Yeah.
like wandering in the dark. It's just a, he just twisted a lot of what actually went on.
Which you see a lot when people who divorcing, they show up to their, his own recording and see all back and forth.
I mean, and maybe with a little bit of irony, the injury just so happens to be the same occurred in 1980 by Danny. Right, Danny Torrance and his father dislocated shoulder. We're just discussing The Shining in another time. It's just, it's like some irony there. Is there a similar scene? Is there an interaction with the main character and her estranged husband in the US version?
Yeah, so they have an argument there. I guess they're at, it didn't sound like they were at the attorney's office, they were at, I guess, like the Rich counsel, is that what that was?
I think so.
Yeah, because he at one point said he was going to get them. But yeah, they have an argument about like, sort of the Dale and Cece's location.
Any indication in either film that either of those scenes or both are a product of the primary protagonist's mind and otherwise doesn't really exist? Didn't really know. Because the issue here, and I, not to put any words in anyone's mouth, is that we're probably going to begin to discuss this case as one of psychosis,
Mhm.
rule out schizophrenia, right? And if that is the case, I want to challenge you to think that maybe this is not a third person perspective, but instead a first person perspective. And that we're seeing from her eyes. Now, what's her job?
Proofread novels, at least in Japanese.
Yeah, she was a, her job was initially reporting up the boards. She eventually takes on the like that, the radiology assistant or the secretary of the radiology office. I don't know what her role is.
Now, we've discussed this in the context of The Shining. Again, apologies for the parallel reference, but this challenge as to whether or not you're going to adopt a third versus a first person perspective, I think is even made more interesting when the protagonist, the very person, the character we're discussing, happens to be an author, or in this case, even a proofreader. Because boy, I mean, this makes the third person perspective, our perspective, even less likely. Right, so at least in the original version, she's proofreading. Why are you so quick to move off this idea that we're not seeing everything from her eyes? And if we are, does her husband even exist? You're going to talk about this as a case of psychosis anyway. It's just a matter of perspective now. I think in the remake, where maybe she's not an author, she's not a proofreader, she does something completely different. The challenge is still there, but we just lose that additional support that is in fact what we're seeing, i.e. through her eyes. But we still have to consider this.
One thing that's interesting is the narrations is by the daughter at the end. When she's like 15, you wonder, A, is that real, or B, is it actually the daughter's first person
Right,
account?
right. The only thing I'll bring up in I know we discussed this in the context of Mr. Murray, thinking maybe there's antisocial traits. But if we do adopt this perspective that we're seeing through the eyes of the protagonist, her looking at that missing persons flyer, might we consider that this is really not her daughter, but instead someone she abducted? She's telling people it's her daughter, but I don't think people who abduct children usually say, hey, sling it to them. And that's the bump, of course, if I'm meeting her husband. But that also assumes that meeting her husband, I'm not seeing through her perspective, and this is her own delusional system. Which again is more consistent with her being a proofreader because she's offering it.
I think also going back to the daughter's recount of what happened, like she doesn't seem to remember any of it. And all she remembers like, yeah, I used to live with my mom for a little bit, but also go into the fact that maybe this is all psychosis and it's not actually true what's going on.
Either way, we're gonna get to this idea that she's psychotic, right? So, whether you buy this or sell this, the fact is, you probably still have to discuss this case as a case of psychosis, rule out schizophrenia. Now, I made a comment before, not all deceitful behavior is antisocial personality that are obviously and emphatically is true. Not all psychosis is schizophrenia. Matter of fact, it is more likely to be viewed as something else. Schizophrenia is prevalent between 1.5% in the US population. Complicated a little bit because it's also the original Asian molecule. But think about one person. Greater likelihood other illnesses, including mood disorder. So we went through this algorithm, we went through this formulation in prior films, in prior analyses. If schizophrenia, give me the inclusion criteria for which this individual would only need one. One. Save that thought. Definitely save that thought, please. That's you're reading my mind. Not that I really believe that. Grossly disorganized or catatonic behavior. All right. She only is required to have 2 of those 5. Does she rule it? Yeah, she does. Okay, now, this is where we have to acknowledge and remind ourselves that this condition is itself a diagnosis of exclusion for which we have to investigate and definitively rule out 5 illnesses, which are, number 1.
Substances, like a medical condition.
2. 3 more. More specific. Good. 2 more.
Drama.
No, not trauma,
And PTSD.
right? A primary mood disorder with psychosis. And the 5th and final was an autism spectrum disorder. Okay. Now, again, ASD is in a differential here because of the difficulty communicating, both verbally and non-verbally. So that could be misattributed as having disorganized speech or disorganized behavior. And while that may or may not be true here, the fact that this individual is presenting with delusions and hallucinations goes against ASD, even if there were these overlapping signs and symptoms. So it really doesn't matter if she has a pre-existing condition of ASD. She still is ruling in for schizophrenia because of the inclusion of those other criteria that do not overlap with an autism spectrum disorder. Any evidence here that there's an underlying medical condition?
It's like pretty significant migraines in the beginning of the movie.
I was gonna get to that next. So I'm worried about what is being diagnosed as migraines because CNS tumor is certainly something that we have to consider with nuance of diagnosis. Not everyone who is being evaluated for schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder, for that matter, gets a CT or MRI. Yeah, that's not cost effective. It's not going to happen. However, with any neurological findings or with any atypical onset, a CT or MRI would be indicated, and I think this history of migraines would fit there. Now we don't give her a physical exam, but we don't have a reflex hammer in this movie. But I think getting an MRI or CT, it's probably a CT scan, is probably the next step here. Let's see, it comes back completely negative, and there's not even any evidence to suggest that an MRI would be helpful. So we're going to rule that out. I'm hearing that also ruling out a substance-induced psychotic disorder would be very high in her differential diagnosis, and the fact that she's being exposed to mold is very concerning, especially when we see similar symptoms, at least the nausea, in her door. So that's something that has to be considered here as well. Let's say that there has been a workup and that the toxicologist and the internist reassures us that there's nothing going on here. What's the next step? So we've investigated and ruled out ASD and the two organic etiologies, both medical condition as well as substance-induced psychotic disorder.
Well, you know, she had like this major stress over the board.
Yeah, so I think the general question is there a mood component to her illness, to her psychosis? And if the answer is no, we're done, right? With the step. If the answer is yes, there are two other conditions per the American Psychiatric Association to consider: schizoaffective versus primary mood disorder with psychotic features. So let's take a step away from the movie for a second, and let's pretend you're at an examination. A patient presents with co-occurring mood and psychotic symptoms. Choice A, primary mood disorder with psychotic features. Answer B, schizoaffective. You're going to go back and reread the question, looking down more closely for what?
Psychotic features and absence of
Or
together.
no, reverse,
Oh, yeah.
Right. right? It really is that easy. Okay, now again, in real life, it's not. It's certainly easier on a shelf exam where in wanting to test your knowledge of knowing A versus B, the question writer is definitely going to have to give you evidence of psychosis without any affective symptoms or vice versa. Okay, now the only thing which is more of a clinical call is this 2-week kind of window. Because the one thing that we want to make sure you don't get trapped in is this idea that, well, I mean, there appear to be co-occurring symptoms, right? Slice of time, they're going to look exactly alike. However, the individual will tell you that, yeah, I did have psychosis in the absence of mood symptoms just the other day. After lunch, I had no problems with dysphoria or depression. I had no siggy caps. I had no elevated, expansive, or irritable mood, and I had no dig fast. And that lasted about an hour. You should not be so quick to say, well, therefore that's schizoaffective. You had an absence of mood symptoms. So the APA does that, and the evidence-based literature suggests 2-week window, right? You got to give it some time, right? And here we operationalize adequate time, 2 weeks. That's the only thing you have to remember beyond. Otherwise, it's one without the other. It gives you the primary disorder. Well, I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth. Do we get that in this movie?
Yes, because at least in the Japanese version, they talk about how when she was like the reader of the horror film or horror books, she also had some kind of psychiatric issue. So doesn't seem like there was a stressor unless the stressor was work, and so that would lead us to think there's also mood symptoms along with that, but we can also assume that those are just like psychotic.
It's hard because they were so big, and
Yeah.
the other thing that comes up is that she actually knows it wasn't that serious. She just talks and didn't think there wasn't psychotic fever. I don't know really stress related. I think maybe more for like the MDD of psychotic features than just the fact that.
And along those lines, what is the relative incidence? Psychotic features within depression versus bipolar? The lifetime prevalence or incidence of psychotic features in someone with major depressive disorder is between 10 and 20%. In bipolar, 50. So it's actually more than double. All right, so your proverbial money is going to be on a bipolar illness or a bipolar spectrum disorder.
Mhm.
Here. Yeah. My gut says, and I'm not really sure if she were to receive treatment in Asia, what would happen, because I don't know the FDA approved drugs, but if that character moved to the US and got treatment, my gut says is that she would likely be started on a second generation antipsychotic. And then when those symptoms improve, at least now we're talking about bipolar symptoms, you're still going to have a little bit of a clinical dilemma as to whether or not her improvement is due to the mood stabilizing effects. These medications are approved for the treatment of bipolar, or instead due to the antipsychotic effect, and whether or not this was actually schizoaffective after all. I'm not saying this to say that, or even promote the idea that maybe lithium would be the better way to go. It is FDA approved. Of course, if there's improvement on lithium, manic symptoms, and then the psychotic symptoms dovetail improvement, we know it's bipolar. If on the other hand, there is persistent psychosis on lithium, it's likely schizoaffective. That might happen, but I'm not sure that should inform your medication dose. What are the, you mentioned the antipsychotics, and largely the second generation antipsychotics. There is one first generation antipsychotic with the FDA approval for the treatment of bipolar disorder, specifically acute mania. What is it? And it's not haloperidol now. It's chlorpromazine. It's actually chlorpromazine. Otherwise, you're talking second generation antipsychotics. I would recommend, for purposes of studying for yourself, you look at those FDA approved for the 3 phases of bipolar, which are what? So generally speaking, let's actually call it 2 phases. There's the active and the inactive. The inactive sounds a little layperson, so we'll call that maintenance, right? The active phase can actually have 2 examples. Of course, it could be active depression and it could be active mania. You can have both. You could have mixed. When mixed, you will categorize it with mania. So usually you hear it almost as one word, mixed mania, because it's either or. The inactive is the maintenance phase, right? So I think it's, again, fairly straightforward. The goal for the active phase, whether you're depressed, whether you're manic/mixed, is to improve active symptoms, right? Maintenance phase is to actually decrease the likelihood of a future mood episode, otherwise recurrence. What is the likelihood of recurrence? So an individual, maybe in the sequel, is hospitalized due to her delusional belief that her new apartment was haunted. And upon psychiatric assessment is revealed to have bipolar affective disorder, for which she receives blank, doesn't matter, right? During her hospitalization, her symptoms improve. And then she is discharged to your follow-up care. And the first question she asks you in follow-up is whether or not she can be weaned off this medication as it is giving her waking. What is your answer? Doc, I have no elevated, expanded, or irritable mood. I have no dip fast. And I have no evidence of psychosis. I'm getting one person shaking their head no, everybody else is staring at her, 2 no's.
The recurrence is hard.
Yeah.
How about if I say it doesn't matter? It makes it easy, right? It makes it can be really easy. So I hear that the likelihood of recurrence is high. Doc, tell me how high is it? Because I'm willing to actually take that chance. I mean, you're telling me it's what, 10%, 25%? I mean, informed consent, right? What are you gonna tell them? Yeah, it's at least 9. Right. No prescriber, no clinician should feel comfortable telling the person that they're likely to be in the top 10%. Right. So once treated for life. Now, there is a little bit of a question as to how you would prefer to enter into the maintenance phase of treatment, because there's one school of thought that says what stabilizes should be also what maintains, even if that medication is not FDA approved for maintenance therapy or the maintenance phase, because not all of them are. The other school of thought, which is more of course, the evidence-based literature, is to change them to a medication, to switch them over to a medication that in fact has withstood the 2 double-blinded and placebo-controlled trials for maintenance therapy. There's no right answer. There's no, one is expert consensus, the other one is evidence-based for the literature, and what is FDA approved. Right, so that's a conversation you have to have with your patient, but in either case, you're recommending lifelong medication. Right, that's maintenance. Questions at this point?
If you have patient going up and you stabilize them, let's say, would you get doing Valproate and would you also add on, you probably have would you?
For this patient?
Sure.
Yes, so generally speaking, we go with the least amount of medications at the lowest dosage possible to overcome the symptoms. That's the general, and you actually see that published in the ABA treatment guidelines. So that part is true. We do go with dual therapy. We do go with polypharmacy when there's quote unquote severe illness. The easiest example of which is when there are psychotic symptoms as part of the presentation. That is when you add the FDA approved antipsychotic onto either the lithium or sodium valproate.
Would you mean the antipsychotic after and just keep it stabilizer?
Potentially, yes. Yes, I think that's fair. Yeah, especially if there's any side effects. And oh, by the way, you are going to have to monitor for diabetes, of course, weight gain, and even dyslipidemia. So likely, yes. Yeah.
Is that the case for peripartum and postpartum?
I think that's a great question. It depends on your level of certainty, right? So for postpartum psychosis, there is now, I think, an emerging school of thought that is supportive in the clinical literature that the stress of childbirth, the biopsychosocial stress of childbirth, is a precipitant to an occult bipolar illness. Exactly right. Right. And if that is the case, then the individual should be treated as if they have bipolar, which means that whatever you provide in terms of that peripartum or postpartum period should be continued for maintenance therapy, given the likelihood. Now, I don't know if the treatment guidelines are that robust when compared to that for bipolar disorder, because this is a relatively new, albeit emerging school of thought, but it is evidence-based. So that's a conversation you have to have with each individual patient. But that's a good point.
Like I find it interesting about how postpartum depression get all is otherwise also known as major depressive disorder with peripartum onset. So what would the primary diagnosis be in postpartum psychosis? Would it be bipolar disorder with psychotic features, peripartum onset, or would you say this gets so affected with peripartum?
Yeah, so I think to arrive at either, I think we need a little bit more information with the assumption that these are two separate dichotomous illnesses, right? Categorizing them with this dichotomy would suggest, number one, that the individual has an occult illness. So maybe we have monozygotic twin with established bipolar and at least one parent with established bipolar. The patient has demonstrated no signs or symptoms prior to their pregnancy, and now we have an episode of postpartum psychosis. In that case, I think in the acute setting, postpartum psychosis is what a CL psychiatrist is likely to diagnose. Hopefully in their formulation, there's some of the stuff we're now discussing. But in follow-up, I can easily see that changing, especially when we're going to recommend lifelong second generation antipsychotic / mood stabilizer therapy to bipolar 1. Right. And that's when, I mean, and people very, very infrequently follow the textbook. But that's assuming that, again, there are no symptoms prior to the pregnancy, and the part of the actual 40 weeks are without symptoms. That definitely answers your question. By the way, 2 horror fans?
We all chose
A classic here that, and not necessarily that, well, again, more, I think, symbolic or metaphorical, but certainly a medication that would definitely launch a very similar conversation as Rosemary's Baby. I mean, a very, classic horror film. And then more recently, one of my favorites is Mama. Both women, certainly could have bipolar. Certainly, the character of Mama, straightforward case, it gets a little complicated with regard to what is reality in Rosemary's Baby and what's disclosed at the end of the movie. No spoilers. I digress. Back to Dark Water. Any other thoughts? Anything else you want to talk about?
Why was I mean, and again, in the Japanese version, why was the entire apartment building seemingly empty? Like, there was not another
neighbor.
there was no neighbors, there was no one else living there other than the two old ladies that were downstairs at one time. I was like, if I lived there, I would run.
Nothing about the invite.
No.
She's in the Japanese version. Did she see the photo of her family in the tenant, the floor above them?
No.
No.
I would have been out at that point. So in the American version, she walks into the flooded apartment above, and it's a photo of, she, thinks she sees it.
Her daughter's up
So
there.
what happens is like, yeah, when that comes out, so later on, the daughter comes back, like 2 years later, supposedly like, telling them what happened. And she has some kind of, like, it's called PTSD. She goes back to tell her what happened, but you see the photo of her mom, and everything is the mom's photo in her head,
Oh, interesting.
and then her mom's just here.
Like, the entire building is run down except for that.
Yeah, and it's also still happening, but they have a cultural.
Yeah.
All right, we'll end it here. Let's keep the folks on Zoom. We could cut our recording. We're good? Oh,
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, as soon as you said we're done.
Gotcha. So the other thing I wanted to briefly bring up, and one of the reasons why I actually think this is bipolar is because of a real life event that occurred that's captured in not one, but 2 documentaries, both of which are outstanding. So this is a real case of Elisa Lam.
Mm.
And there's a couple of reasons as to why. Number one is because the case is perplexing, it's mind-provoking, thought-provoking, and creepy, and they're 2 wonderfully edited and produced documentaries. I don't have exactly where they are, Netflix versus ID, but one is a 3-part series that really is a primary focus on the Cecil Hotel. The second episode of that series is the one on Elisa Lam. The other documentary is a mini-series only on Elisa Lam. So it has much less to do with the hotel itself, and it really does follow what happens to this young girl who has established bipolar disorder. Right, so the very illness that we're discussing in the fictional account is actually established in the real life account of Elisa Lam. Now, the documentary that is, again, not the 3-part series on the Cecil, but the documentary is one that along the lines of what you've probably already seen, where something kooky happens, and then there are dozens of internet sleuths that really tackle it, and you get to see from their perspective what they think is going on. And it gets deeper and deeper and deeper, where it's really fantastic. So check out both.
One's on Netflix and one's on Hulu.
Okay. Okay. And again, you can check with the Twitter group, but we sent them the links to both of them, so they should be posted on my Twitter page. The other thing about this film, which again is a complete 180 than anything we've ever talked about, is, and I didn't realize this until somewhat recently, and that is the disappearance of Elisa Lam actually comes after the movie. Even the U.S. remake. which if you've watched the movie, you realize, oh, this is based on Elisa Lam. You know, it's creepy ass way. It's definitely it until you realize that there's no way it could have been,
Mhm.
which then just gives it another layer altogether. Really, so since you've already done the hard work, the hard part, in watching this movie, discussing this movie, check out The Real Case of Elisa Lam, which occurs years after both of these movies are produced.
She died in 2013.
Mhm.
When you looked at the elevator footage, do you think it was like someone in that episode or even child created money?
God, I'm like 51-49, and this is my.
Yeah, it seemed like she was having a manic episode,
Yeah,
because we talked about it on Tuesday.
yeah. So, again, I've been through that footage more than once.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Now, when you watch the miniseries, they do bring up an alternative explanation to that, and that she's not being followed, and that she's not bipolar, but instead is playing the elevator game.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Which again, is just it's a fan theory, but the game itself is whacked.
Mhm.
Like I would never even think to play that game. Although I should say that. I don't know, it's actually, I have it in a PowerPoint. If you want me, I can send it to you. But basically you walk into an elevator and you push a series of buttons. And after pressing whatever it is, 4, 5, 6 buttons, you press the next button, whatever it is, in that order, and one of two things will happen. Actually, I think, I'm sorry, when you press the next button, I think I want to, for some reason, the number 4 sticks on my mind, I might be wrong. But you get to that floor, and when the door opens, a mysterious woman will be standing there. And you're not supposed to make any kind of contact with her.
Oh my God.
You don't acknowledge her, you don't even look at her, okay? When the door closes, you press the next button on your list, and one of two things will happen. Either the elevator will go down to the ground floor, and if that's the case, you've won. So you get out, you're not supposed to look back. Just walk out of the elevator and walk out of the hotel. On the other hand, if it goes up to the X floor, and I don't know, it might be the 13, I don't know what floor it is. Supposedly you enter into an astral plane, an alternate reality.
You said the fourth floor versus the floor?
I
You know that in Chinese culture, that's bad luck, and like most buildings have the fourth floor because it sounds like this is the word for death. Just like how 13 is bad luck.
I have to check to see what floor. it is.
Well, the
So,
You know, it starts off at the 4th floor and you end up at the 10th,
Okay,
Does it have to be a hotel or
no,
be any building?
any building, as long as it has the 10 floors, any building with 10 floors.
Well, the Cecil Hotel is known for like, it's in Culver City, because I was talking to my mom about it, she goes, that's the hotel we passed by. And I was like, oh my, it's in Culver City, so she was like, yeah, it's known for just like having like weird vibes.
Watch,
It's on the
watch the
Galapagos.
3-part series on the Cecil Hotel. Again, the second episode was on the Lisa Lam.
Mhm.
The first episode's crazy.
Richard Ramirez was also
Yeah.
there.
Really? Oh, jeez, yeah, my mom, she's like, yeah, that's the one that like, when we drove by it, you were like,
Yeah.
no, ma'am.
And that was the last place the Black Dahlia was actually.
Oh, yeah.
Really?
Or see that.
That was the other thing. I was trying to remember.
Oh, there's others.
Yeah, but that was what I was thinking. That's what-
Yeah,
like,
that's it.
more public.
That's a thing.
Yeah,
That's good.
yeah. Maybe.
What is the main character's name in the US version?
This one?
Dahlia. They call it.
Yeah.
How could they name her Dahlia when Elisa Lam didn't vanish from the Cecil Hotel until years later? That's so weird.
I don't question life, I just let it, I don't know.
So the elevator game does that reports time travel?
No.
It's like dimensional
Because
travel.
Because I would guess it's a
Yeah,
dimension.
that's how they got the character.
Yeah, because if it was time travel, I actually would explain why the real life event was inspired by the movie. Backwards. So weird. All right, anyway, if anybody's interested in any scholarly project, I would not mind group watching both versions and coming up with a didactic on how the difference between Asian versus US allows for a differential for the APA. Because I heard enough where I think we can actually come up with a pretty cool lesson plan to teach differential diagnosis based on which version you look at. I think they accompany each other really in a way that maybe, for instance, one could be primary mood disorder with psychosis, the other could be actually schizoaffective. So something we see almost every day in terms of trying to delineate, and maybe a double feature would actually delineate it, albeit through fiction. So if anybody's interested, let me know. All right, guys, we'll be, give us 5 minutes, and we'll be up to discuss a case presentation of a new patient we saw.
That's really good.
Do you want to host that one? Because my
Yeah.
battery
Yeah.
dies so quick for no reason.
Our elevator, do you think?
Oh, my
It wouldn't work though, because someone enters the elevator.
Yeah, yeah.
New patient.
Bye, guys.
Wait, so you're